Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. The silent frequency. The first thing I noticed when I arrived at Outpost 81 was the silence. Not the absence of sound, there's always sound in these remote places, the wind howling across the tundra, the creak of metal contracting in the cold, the hum of equipment. No, what I noticed was the absence of radio chatter. For a weather station whose primary purpose was to monitor and transmit atmospheric data, the radio room was eerily quiet. Power issues, Station Chief Holloway explained as he led me through the facility. Been having trouble with the generators since the last storm. Sometimes the equipment shuts down. I nodded, though something about his explanation felt off. I'd been sent to this decommissioned weather station in northern Alaska to assess whether it was worth maintaining, or if the National Weather Service should cut its losses and shut it down completely. Budget cuts had been hitting hard, and remote stations like this one were first on the chopping block. "How long have you been stationed here, Chief?" I asked, watching my breath form clouds in the frigid air inside the corridor. The heating wasn't working well either, apparently. "Going on 15 years, he said without turning back to look at me. Longest-serving chief in Outpost 81's history. The facility had been built in the 1960s as part of the Cold War early warning system, later converted to a weather station when tensions with Russia eased. It consisted of a main building with living quarters, a mess hall, and operations rooms, plus 3 satellite buildings housing various equipment, all connected by enclosed walkways that protected against the brutal Arctic conditions outside. "And how many staff currently?" I continued my questions, making mental notes for my report. "Just me and Dr. Marsh now," Holloway said. "Used to be 6 of us, but budget cuts, you know." I did know. "That's why I was here, Dr. Marsh," I asked. "You have a medical doctor on site?" Holloway chuckled, a dry sound that didn't contain any actual humor. "Meteorologist, PhD in atmospheric sciences. Smart as they come, but not much for conversation." We reached my quarters, a small but serviceable room with a narrow bed, desk, and private bathroom, luxury by remote outpost standards. "Dinner's at 18:00 hours, Holloway said. "Mess hall's down the corridor, take a right at the junction, can't miss it." "And when can I see the equipment, the transmitters, receivers, monitoring stations?" Something flickered across Holloway's weathered face. "Tomorrow. It's almost dark now, and we keep the exterior lights off to conserve power. Better to do the tour in daylight." I nodded, though it was only 3 p.m. But this far north in winter, darkness came early and stayed long. "One more thing," Holloway said, pausing at the door. "Some of the equipment makes noise sometimes. Power's up on its own. Don't worry about it, just the generators surging." Before I could ask for clarification, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the metal corridor. I unpacked my small duffel bag, arranging my clothes in the narrow dresser and setting up my laptop. The satellite internet connection was weak but functional, another luxury I hadn't expected. I sent a quick email to my supervisor letting him know I'd arrived safely, then decided to rest before dinner. The journey had been long, commercial flight to Anchorage, then a smaller plane to a remote airstrip, followed by a 2-hour snowcat ride to the outpost. I must have fallen asleep because I woke to darkness and the sound of static. At first I thought it was coming from outside my room, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, I realized it was emanating from the small radio on my nightstand, a radio I hadn't noticed before. The static pulsed with an almost rhythmic quality. 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, pause, like Morse code, but not quite. I reached for the radio, turning the volume dial down. The static continued at the same intensity. I tried the power button, nothing happened. Finally, I simply unplugged it from the wall. The static continued. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. I picked up the radio, examining it in the dim light. It was an old model, probably from the 80s, with analog dials and a telescoping antenna. No batteries that I could see, yet it continued to emit that pulsing static even unplugged. I set it down on the desk, away from my bed, and checked my watch. 5:45 p.m., almost dinner time. I decided to bring the radio with me to ask Holloway about it. The corridors were dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of my eye. The metal walls amplified every sound, my footsteps, my breathing, the soft static from the radio I carried. I followed Holloway's directions and found the mess hall easily enough. It was larger than I expected, with 6 tables that could seat 4 people each, though only one had place settings. Holloway was already there, spooning something from a pot on a hot plate. "Hope you like stew," he said without looking up. "Not much fresh food makes it out here." "It's fine," I said, setting the radio down on the table. "I found this in my room, it won't turn off." Holloway glanced at it, his expression unreadable. "Must be picking up interference from the equipment." "It's unplugged," I pointed out. He shrugged. Old models like that, sometimes they have capacitors that hold a charge. It'll die out eventually. I wasn't convinced, but before I could press further, the mess hall door opened and another figure entered. Tall, thin, with pale skin and hair so blonde it was almost white, the woman moved with a strange, gliding gait. "Dr. Marsh, I presume," I said, standing to introduce myself. She didn't respond, didn't even look at me. Instead, she went straight to the pot, served herself, and sat at the far end of our table. "Don't take it personally," Holloway said quietly. "She doesn't talk much, not since the accident." "Accident?" I prompted. 3 years ago, storm knocked out power. She was checking the satellite dish, got caught in the cold for too long. Frostbite affected her vocal cords somehow. I glanced at Dr. Marsh, who was methodically eating her stew, eyes fixed on her bowl. There was something off about her movements, too precise, too measured. Throughout dinner, the radio continued its pulsing static. 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, pause. Neither Holloway nor Marsh seemed bothered by it, though I caught Marsh glancing at it occasionally, her pale eyes reflecting the dim overhead lights. After we'd eaten, Holloway collected our bowls. "Get some rest," he advised me. "Tour starts at 800 tomorrow, and don't worry about the radio. Like I said, it'll die out." I returned to my room, the radio still emitting its strange pattern. I placed it in the small bathroom and closed the door, which muffled the sound enough that I thought I might be able to sleep. I was wrong. The static invaded my dreams. In them I stood on the frozen tundra outside the outpost, the northern lights rippling overhead in impossible colors. The static came from everywhere and nowhere, pulsing through the ground beneath my feet, through the air around me, through my very bones. 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, pause, and in the distance something moved across the ice. Something large with too many limbs, its form obscured by swirling snow. I woke gasping, sweat-soaked despite the cold room. The radio's static had changed. Now it was continuous, a roaring white noise that seemed to fill the space. I stumbled to the bathroom, flicking on the light. The radio sat where I'd left it, but now the dial was moving on its own, scanning through frequencies though it remained unplugged. As I watched, it stopped suddenly and the static cleared. "Return to station," came a voice through the speaker, distorted but recognizable as human. "Repeat, all personnel return to station immediately. Unknown atmospheric phenomenon approaching." The message repeated once, then dissolved back into static. I stood frozen, heart pounding. The timestamp. I needed to know when that message had been sent. I grabbed the radio and rushed out into the corridor, heading for the operations room I'd glimpsed during my arrival. The facility was maze-like, and in my haste and the dim lighting, I took several wrong turns before finding it. The operations room was dark except for the glow of various monitors and equipment displays. And to my shock, every piece of equipment was on, lights blinking, screens displaying data, printers spitting out readouts. "So much for power issues. You shouldn't be in here," came Holloway's voice from behind me, making me jump. I turned to find him standing in the doorway, his figure silhouetted against the corridor lights. "The radio," I said, holding it up. It broadcast a message, something about personnel returning to the station, an atmospheric phenomenon. Holloway stepped into the room, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitors. He looked older in this light, his skin almost translucent. "That was the last broadcast from this station," he said quietly. 12 years ago." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair. "There's something you need to understand about Outpost 81. I sat, placing the now silent radio on the console in front of me. 12 years ago, our instruments detected something unusual," Holloway began. "A weather pattern that didn't match any known phenomenon. The readings were off the charts: electromagnetic activity, barometric pressure, temperature fluctuations. I sent out the call for all personnel to return to the station. But," I prompted when he paused. "But they didn't make it back in time. The phenomenon hit faster than we anticipated. Only Dr. Marsh and I were inside when it happened." "When what happened?" Holloway's eyes reflected the monitor lights, giving them an eerie, luminous quality. "The phenomenon wasn't weather, it was something else, something that came through the atmosphere. My skin crawled. Through, from where, we don't know, somewhere else. Another dimension maybe, another reality. The instruments couldn't make sense of it. Neither could we." I glanced around at the active equipment. "So what happened to the other personnel?" Holloway's expression darkened. "They were caught outside. We found them later, or what was left of them. Their bodies were changed. Like something had tried to reshape them into something else, something not human." My mouth went dry. "And you've been here ever since, just you and Dr. Marsh. Why didn't you call for evacuation?" "We tried," he said, his voice hollow. "No one came, and after a while we realized the phenomenon never left. It's still here, all around us. We can see it sometimes when the conditions are right, out on the ice." I thought of my dream, of the shape moving across the tundra. "But the National Weather Service sent me here. They know you're still operational." Holloway smiled, a sad expression. Do they? Check the date on your orders. Check the date on any communication you've received. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone, navigating to my emails. The timestamp on my supervisor's last message read 12 years ago. That's impossible, I whispered. I just got these orders last week. I flew here yesterday. Time moves differently here now, Holloway said, since the phenomenon. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes not at all. The radio on the console suddenly crackled to life again, the same pulsing static as before. 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, pause. It's coming again, Holloway said, his eyes wide with fear. We need to get to the safe room. What's coming? I demanded, but he was already pulling me toward the door. We hurried through the corridors, the lights flickering overhead. The static from the radio grew louder, though I'd left it behind in the operations room. It's in the walls now, Holloway explained as we ran. In the electrical systems, in the air itself, the phenomenon. We never really understood what it was, but it seems to be some kind of entity, or entities. They communicate through electromagnetic frequencies. The static, I realized. Yes, they're talking to each other. Planning what? Before he could answer, we rounded a corner and nearly collided with Dr. Marsh. She stood perfectly still in the middle of the corridor, her pale eyes fixed on something beyond the walls. Dr. Marsh, Holloway said urgently. It's happening again, we need to move. She didn't respond, didn't even blink. Dr. Marsh, I tried. Slowly, her head turned toward me, the movement too smooth, too mechanical. When she opened her mouth, the sound that emerged wasn't human speech, but the same pulsing static I'd heard from the radio. 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, pause, Holloway cursed, pulling me back. Too late. They've got her again. What do you mean, got her? I asked, backing away from Marsh, whose body was now vibrating subtly like a tuning fork. The phenomenon affects people differently, Holloway explained, still retreating. Some it kills outright, others it changes, uses. Dr. Marsh has been fighting it for years, but sometimes they break through. As if to confirm his words, Marsh's body suddenly contorted, her back arching at an impossible angle. The static emanating from her mouth grew louder, changing pattern. Run, Holloway shouted, shoving me down a side corridor. We sprinted through the facility, the lights flickering more violently now. Behind us, I could hear something moving, not footsteps, but a slithering, scraping sound like too many limbs dragging across metal. In here, Holloway said, punching a code into a keypad beside a heavy door. It slid open to reveal a small room with reinforced walls. Quickly, I ducked inside, and he followed, slamming his hand on an interior panel that sealed the door with a hydraulic hiss. What is this place? I asked, trying to catch my breath. Panic room, built during the Cold War in case of nuclear attack. The walls are lined with lead and other materials that seem to block whatever frequency the phenomenon operates on. I looked around the sparse room. A couple of cots, some shelves with supplies, a small bathroom cubicle, and most surprisingly, a window small and thick but offering a view outside. We should be safe here for a while, Holloway said, sinking onto one of the cots. Until it passes, I moved to the window, peering out at the frozen landscape. Night had fallen completely, but the snow reflected enough light to make out the basic shapes of the outpost buildings, and beyond them on the tundra. Holloway, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, there's something out there. He joined me at the window, his expression grim. I see it. Against the white expanse of snow, dark shapes moved. They were difficult to focus on, as if they existed partially in another spectrum of light. But they were massive, with elongated limbs that seemed to bend in too many places. They surrounded the outpost, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested intelligence and purpose. What are they doing? I asked. Waiting, Holloway replied. They've been waiting for 12 years. For what? He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the unearthly light from outside. For you, my blood ran cold. Me, why? Not you specifically, anyone, new blood. They've had Marsh and me for years, but they want more, need more. For what purpose? Holloway shook his head. We don't know exactly. But they change people, remake them. Marsh and I, we've fought it, but it's getting harder. The longer you stay here, the more you start to hear them in your head. I recalled the dream I'd had, the static that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. So they sent out a signal, made the weather service think this place was still operational. Yes, they can manipulate electronics, communications, time itself to some extent. They needed someone to come here. But why? What do they want? Holloway's expression darkened. To spread. This outpost is like a beachhead. They can't leave it yet. Something about the specific conditions here contains them. But they're learning, adapting. And if they can change enough people, they could expand their territory, I finished, horrified. Exactly. A sudden banging on the door made us both jump. It wasn't the sound of fists or hands, but something harder, sharper. They're trying to get in, Holloway whispered. They've never done that before. They must be desperate. The banging continued, growing more insistent. And now I could hear the static again, seeping through the walls despite the shielding. Three bursts, pause, three bursts, pause. We need to get out of here, I said. Contact the mainland, get an evacuation team. Holloway laughed bitterly. We've tried, for 12 years we've tried. The radios don't work, not for sending, only for receiving. And even if we could get a message out, time works differently here, remember. By the time help arrived, it could be decades later. Or they'd arrive before we even sent the message. The banging intensified, and now the door was beginning to dent inward. That's not possible, I said, backing away. That door is reinforced steel. They're stronger than they look, Holloway said grimly. And they're getting stronger. A particularly violent impact caused the door to buckle visibly. Through the new gap, I could see something moving in the corridor, something that gleamed wetly in the emergency lights, with too many appendages ending in sharp points. There has to be another way out, I said desperately, scanning the room. There isn't, Holloway replied, his voice strangely calm now. I'm sorry, I thought we'd be safe here longer. Another impact, and the gap in the door widened. Through it, I caught a glimpse of what waited outside, not Dr. Marsh, or at least not as she had been. Her body had changed, elongated, her limbs split and reformed into something insectal and wrong. And her face. Her face was gone, replaced by what looked like a speaker or receiver of some kind, emitting that same pulsing static. Three bursts, pause, three bursts, pause. What are they saying? I asked, my voice barely audible over the noise. Holloway's eyes had taken on that same luminous quality I'd noticed earlier. They're calling to the others, the ones outside, telling them it's time. Time for what? He turned to me, and I realized with horror that his skin was beginning to ripple, as if something was moving beneath it. Time to change you like they changed us. Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. You're one of them. He smiled, his teeth too numerous now, too sharp. Not yet, not completely, but soon. They work slowly, you see. Changing us bit by bit. Marsh was further along because she was outside longer during the initial contact. I've been fighting it, but... His body spasmed suddenly, his back arching just as Marsh's had. When he straightened, his eyes had changed completely, now glowing with an internal light. But now you're here, he continued, his voice overlaid with static. Fresh, untouched, they're excited. They want to see how quickly they can change you. I backed away until I hit the window. Outside, the shapes on the tundra were moving closer, converging on the outpost. The door gave way with a screech of tearing metal. The thing that had been Dr. Marsh squeezed through, its body flowing and reshaping to fit the gap. Behind it came others, former personnel from the outpost, I realized with horror. Changed, remade. Holloway's body was changing more rapidly now, his limbs elongating, splitting, but his face remained mostly human, wearing an expression of terrible sadness. I'm sorry, he said again, the static in his voice growing stronger. I tried to warn you, the radio. I thought if you heard them early enough, you might understand, might find a way out. There is no way out, is there? I asked, already knowing the answer. No. Not anymore. The creatures surrounded me, their bodies vibrating in unison, emitting that same pulsing static. Three bursts, pause, and now I understood what they were saying. They were counting down. 3, 2, 1. The window behind me shattered as something massive slammed into it from outside. Cold air rushed in, carrying snow and the smell of ozone. I felt limbs wrap around me, too many limbs, too strong to fight against. As they pulled me through the broken window into the Arctic night, I saw the sky above had changed. The northern lights were there, but wrong, moving in patterns that hurt to look at, in colors that shouldn't exist. And beyond them, visible now through the tear they had made in our reality, I could see their world. A place of impossible geometry and writhing shapes where the rules of physics and biology meant nothing. They were bringing me there. To change me, to remake me. And as the static filled my head, drowning out my thoughts, my last coherent realization was that I had never left my room at all. The radio was still there on my nightstand, still emitting its pulsing signal. Three bursts, pause, the sound of them calling me home. I've been at Outpost 81 for 12 years now, or maybe it's been a day, or a century. Time doesn't work right here anymore. Sometimes new people arrive. Inspectors, maintenance crews, curious researchers. I try to warn them with the radio. I place it in their rooms before they arrive, tune it to the frequency where my consciousness still exists, separate from the thing my body has become. Three bursts, pause, a warning, a countdown. A futile attempt to save them from what happened to me, but they never listen, they never understand until it's too late. And the entities that came through the atmosphere continue to wait, to watch, to learn, growing stronger with each new person they change, preparing for the day when they'll be strong enough to leave this place and spread across the world. I can feel them in my mind now, excited by the helicopter approaching on the horizon. New blood coming. Three bursts, pause, the countdown begins again.